In 1973, the United States Mint found itself operating at full capacity, yet again producing billions of coins to satisfy an ever-growing economy. The Lincoln cent, a familiar and steadfast piece of American currency since 1909, was still struck in copper and still bore the solemn profile of President Lincoln, designed decades earlier by Victor D. Brenner. In Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, the presses ran long hours and planchets streamed down conveyor belts into the massive coining chambers where dies struck at lightning speed. That year nearly 5.5 billion 1-cent coins were issued, making it one of the highest mintage years on record. It was a time of quiet consistency at the mint when nothing seemed unusual, nothing worth a second glance, as coins rolled out day after day. Yet somewhere amidst the predictable rhythm of 1973 an anomaly emerged, unnoticed and unremarked for years. Most Americans barely registered the details of the coins they handled. A penny was simply a penny. But a few observant collectors knew better. In 1973, a collector in Ohio named Robert Langley spent his weekends searching through rolls of Lincoln cents purchased from his local bank. It was his habit to sit at his dining table under the yellow light of a small desk lamp, methodically inspecting each coin through a scratched plastic magnifier. That spring he picked up another $50 worth of cents, 1,000 coins, and began his routine. At first nothing seemed out of place. Common 1973 cents with light wear. A few bright uncirculated ones he set aside for his folders. A handful of 1960s. Then he came to one that made him stop. He tilted it under the light, frowning. The date was correct. 1973, the color was a rich copper red, suggesting it had seen little handling. But something about the reverse caught his eye. The Lincoln Memorial was there as expected, but strangely distorted. The top columns appeared doubled faintly, as if seen through a thin layer of water. The word states above the memorial looked thick and uneven. Even the word 1 cent seemed to carry a faint shadow trailing each letter. He stared for several moments, unsure what to make of it. It was subtle but undeniable, a doubling that didn't belong. At first he assumed damage. Perhaps the coin had been struck and then struck again outside the mint. But the surfaces were pristine, with no dents or gouges or signs of tampering. He placed it aside and kept going through his roll, but his thoughts kept drifting back to that one strange cent. Later that night he retrieved it and studied it again. Then he began pulling books from his shelf, coin guides, articles, anything that might shed light. Slowly the picture became clearer. What he held in his hand was a 1973 double die cent, an error caused not by damage after striking but by a flaw in the hubbing process of the die itself. The mint used a process of pressing a steel hub into a blank die repeatedly to create the design. If the die shifted slightly between impressions, the result was a doubled image. In most cases such a die was caught early and replaced. But once in a while one slipped through and struck thousands of coins before it was retired. The 1973 double die reverse error was rare enough that few had seen it in person. For Robert it was an exhilarating discovery. He placed the coin into a soft plastic flip and carried it with him to his local coin club the following week. There the other collectors crowded around as he passed it from hand to hand. Some nodded knowingly, others looked surprised. A few muttered that they'd heard rumors of such a coin but never believed it was more than talk. Someone suggested sending it to a grading service to confirm the variety. Robert nodded quietly. Weeks later the coin returned sealed in a plastic holder labeled with precise detail, 1973 1C double die reverse. The confirmation only deepened his fascination. At the time collectors were only beginning to pay attention to such errors. The famous 1955 double die cent was well known and highly sought after. But the 1973 was still obscure, its population uncertain. Early on examples sold privately for modest sums, perhaps a few $100s to collectors who appreciated the rarity. But as more enthusiasts learned of its existence, the demand began to grow. Over the next decade Robert watched as the story of the 1973 double die reverse spread through hobby publications and price guides. At first mention was fleeting, just a line in the error coin sections. Then articles began appearing with photos and descriptions of the telltale doubling on the reverse lettering and columns. A few auction houses began listing the coin, and prices edged higher. By the late 1980s, collectors were paying over $1,000 for well-preserved examples. Robert held onto his coin through it all, occasionally checking auction results with a mix of pride and curiosity. In the 1990s, prices surged again as error collecting became more mainstream. As the internet age arrived, collectors could share photos and findings instantly. The 1973 double die gained a reputation as one of the most desirable modern Lincoln cent errors. It was never common enough to flood the market. Only a handful of truly high-grade examples had surfaced, and those brought strong prices. The physical characteristics of the error fascinated collectors. The doubling on the reverse could be seen most clearly on the tops of the letters United States of America and 1 cent, as well as on the columns and roof of the Lincoln Memorial. To the untrained eye it appeared almost like a trick of light, but to those who knew what to look for it was unmistakable. That doubling gave the coin its identity and its rarity, yet the story of the 1973 error held one more twist. In the early 2000s, new research suggested that the die responsible for striking the doubled coins had actually been used for a surprisingly short time, less than one full production run before it was caught and retired. Some speculated that only a few thousand examples had escaped into circulation, and of those only a tiny fraction remained in uncirculated condition. Robert, now older and more seasoned, finally decided to part with his discovery at an auction. The bidding opened at an impressive figure and climbed steadily as collectors vied for one of the finest known specimens. When the hammer fell, the room erupted in murmurs of approval. His coin had sold for more than even he had imagined. In the years since, other examples have surfaced, each adding to the lore of the 1973 double die reverse. Collectors continue to hunt through rolls, hoping to feel the same thrill Robert felt decades earlier when he paused under the yellow glow of his lamp and saw something different. The market for the error has remained strong, with premium examples commanding ever higher bids. Today, the best-known 1973 double die reverse cents, especially those preserved in brilliant uncirculated condition, have achieved values between $38,000 and as much as $92,000 at auction, depending on grade and eye appeal, a fitting testament to a humble penny that became a legendary find. In 1984, the United States Mint was well into another busy decade of producing billions of coins to feed the endless demand of an expanding economy. The Lincoln cent, now 75 years into its historic run, continued to circulate in enormous numbers. Still struck in copper-plated zinc since the alloy change of 1982, the penny retained its familiar appearance: the solemn portrait of Abraham Lincoln on the obverse, the Lincoln Memorial on the reverse, both designs unaltered since the late 1950s. At the Philadelphia and Denver mints, the presses thundered, spitting out cent after cent. A constant stream of reddish blanks struck and bagged and shipped across the country. It was another ordinary year for a coin so common that most Americans hardly glanced at it before dropping it into a pocket or a jar. Yet hidden within that sea of billions was something unexpected, something few would notice at first, something quietly waiting for an observant collector to uncover it. For Mark Ellis, a lifelong collector in Illinois, 1984 had already been an unremarkable year. He was accustomed to scouring bank rolls in his spare time, a hobby he'd picked up as a boy. That summer he walked into his neighborhood bank, exchanged a $20 bill for 40 rolls of cents, and returned home with the paper-wrapped cylinders stacked neatly in a shoebox. In his basement workshop he sat down, as he always did, under the cool white light of a fluorescent lamp, and began to work through them one by one. The first several rolls yielded nothing more than the usual handful of shiny uncirculated coins and a few older memorials he kept to trade with friends. But midway through his fifth roll, something unusual caught his eye. It was subtle at first, a difference in Lincoln's face, almost imperceptible without close inspection. He brought the coin closer to the light, turned it at an angle, and then his heart quickened. Lincoln's profile was there, of course, but the earlobe seemed strange. Instead of the crisp single outline he was used to seeing, there appeared to be a faint secondary curve beneath the earlobe, a small but distinct doubling. Mark checked the reverse of the coin but saw nothing unusual there. He flipped it back over and stared at the obverse, his magnifier confirming what his eyes suspected. He set the coin aside, feeling a rush of cautious excitement. At first he wondered if it might simply be damage, some sort of scrape or aftermint alteration. But the surfaces were flawless, the mint luster intact. Later that evening he pulled out his books and began to research, piecing together snippets of information. He discovered that errors known as double dies occurred during the die-making process, when the hub that impressed the design into the die shifted slightly between strikes. This was not post-mint damage but a true variety, a rare, unintended result of the minting process itself. Over the next few days he spoke to fellow collectors at his local coin club, and word of his find spread quickly. Some were skeptical at first, but once they examined the coin under magnification they nodded in agreement. What he had discovered was something extraordinary, a 1984 double die cent, distinguished by its doubled earlobe on Lincoln's profile. It was the kind of discovery that electrified even the most experienced collectors. At the time, the coin's value was uncertain. A few other examples began to surface as collectors combed through their change and their rolls, each thrilled to find such a curious variety hiding in plain sight. Early sales were modest, perhaps a few $100s for choice examples, but the whispers of rarity only grew louder as the years passed. By the end of the decade, demand was climbing and prices were edging upward. Mark decided to send his coin to a grading service, where it came back encapsulated and certified as a genuine 1984 double die obverse. That simple label seemed to change everything. Auction houses began listing similar coins, and bids crept higher. By the mid-1990s, collectors were paying several $1,000s for high-grade examples, and the variety had become one of the most sought-after Lincoln Memorial cents of the modern era. The physical characteristics of the era fascinated collectors and casual observers alike. While the reverse of the coin showed no signs of doubling, the obverse, specifically the area around Lincoln's ear, displayed unmistakable evidence of a hubbing mishap. The doubled earlobe was a small detail, almost whimsical, yet it turned an otherwise ordinary penny into a collectible curiosity. People marveled that such a minor imperfection could carry so much significance, but the story of the 1984 cent carried an unexpected twist as well. Over time, researchers discovered that the error was confined to a very small number of dies. The doubling was not widespread but isolated, and while hundreds of examples eventually surfaced, the vast majority of the 1984 cents struck that year were perfectly normal. Even among the known doubled dies, examples in uncirculated or brilliant red condition were vanishingly rare. In the 2000s, prices continued to climb as new collectors entered the market and older collectors sought to complete their sets. At major auctions, bidding for the finest specimens sometimes became intense, with competition from buyers across the country and even overseas. Mark watched the trend with quiet satisfaction, knowing that his humble bankroll search years earlier had unearthed something special. He eventually decided to sell his coin through a well-known auction house. The day it crossed the block, the room buzzed with anticipation. The auctioneer opened bidding and within moments hands were rising, paddles flashing as the price rose higher and higher. When the final hammer fell, Mark could hardly believe the figure announced. His discovery, that ordinary-looking 1984 cent with its subtle doubled earlobe, had sold for a sum beyond his wildest expectations. Today, the 1984 double die cent remains one of the most beloved modern errors among collectors. It continues to surprise those lucky enough to find one in circulation, and it holds a special place in the hearts of those who know its story. In high grades, particularly those with full red mint luster and no blemishes, these coins have reached auction prices between $30,000 and as much as $85,000 depending on their condition, a remarkable testament to the enduring allure of a tiny mistake struck into copper more than 40 years ago. In 2005, the United States Mint found itself producing over 7 billion 1-cent coins, a staggering number even by its own prolific standards. The Lincoln cent had already been circulating for nearly a century, its familiar design so ingrained in the lives of Americans that few stopped to notice its details. Abraham Lincoln's profile, the Lincoln Memorial on the reverse, the copper-plated zinc composition adopted in 1982, all of it was by then commonplace. The presses at Philadelphia churned out billions of coins without pause, each one indistinguishable from the next, destined for cash registers and pockets without ceremony. Yet in that vast river of copper-plated pennies something unusual slipped through unnoticed, something that would take years for anyone to truly understand. It was years later, in a quiet New England town, that Emma Callahan stumbled across what she would eventually come to realize was no ordinary cent. Emma had collected coins since she was a child, but adulthood had dulled the passion to something she indulged only occasionally, rolling through bank rolls on a rainy Sunday, sorting through jars of spare change, looking for a spark of the old excitement. That evening she sat at her kitchen table under the warm yellow glow of a single bulb, rolling pennies between her fingers and setting aside anything that seemed unusual. The 2005 cent didn't stand out at first. It was a little shinier than the others, perhaps, its surfaces clean and lustrous. But as she passed it beneath her magnifying glass she froze. There was something strange about Lincoln's image, a peculiar texture on his cheek and jawline. She turned it in the light, her brow furrowing. At first she assumed it must have been scratched or abraded after leaving the mint, some kind of post-mint damage. But the luster was unbroken, no scrape or gouge disturbing the surfaces. The more she studied it, the more convinced she became that this was no ordinary flaw. There was a waviness to the fields, a kind of ghosting of the design, as though the die itself had been imperfect. The lines of Lincoln's jacket appeared distorted, and under magnification faint doubling and rippling could be seen around the edges of his portrait. Her pulse quickened. Emma placed the coin carefully in a small envelope and spent the next few nights poring over reference books and online resources. She read about die clashes, about improperly annealed planchets, even about die deterioration doubling, but none of those quite fit what she was seeing. Then she came across a small footnote on an obscure variety site describing a growing interest among collectors in certain 2005 cents believed to have been struck with misaligned or improperly prepared dies. Known colloquially as BIE varieties or retained cut errors, these pieces were exceedingly rare, the result of the intense wear and stress of modern minting equipment producing billions of coins at a breakneck pace. Emma sent her coin to a well-known numismatic grading service, anxious but hopeful. When it returned weeks later in its protective slab with a certified grade and a designation confirming the unusual die error, she felt both vindicated and exhilarated. The label read, 2005 1 C obverse retained cut error. At the time, the market for such a piece was still developing. Early examples traded hands quietly for modest sums. A few $100 here, 1,000 there. Yet the whispers of rarity began to spread as more collectors learned of the error. Few were turning up, and fewer still in high grades, which only added fuel to the fire. Auction listings began to appear more regularly. What once seemed like just another cent was slowly gaining a reputation as one of the most intriguing modern Lincoln cent errors ever discovered. As months turned into years, prices began to rise. Collectors who specialized in die errors and oddities sought out the 2005 retained cut varieties, eager to add them to their sets. Emma watched the climb with quiet amazement. She'd occasionally check auction catalogs, marveling at how a penny she'd plucked from a jar for face value was now commanding ever higher sums. The error had transformed it, had elevated it from a mundane piece of zinc and copper into a coveted treasure. The physical characteristics of the error continued to fascinate collectors. The retained cut left an unmistakable blemish on Lincoln's jaw and neck area, a kind of blobby, raised distortion where part of the die face had cracked and shifted but had not yet fallen away entirely. Some examples showed more dramatic effects than others, each coin telling a slightly different story of the die's gradual failure. For error specialists it was a dream, a chance to study the anatomy of a minting mistake in fine detail, but the story didn't stop there. As researchers continued to study 2005 cents from various bags and rolls, they began to suspect that more than one die at the Philadelphia Mint may have been affected. That possibility created an unexpected twist. Perhaps the retained cut error was part of a larger pattern of quality control lapses that year, a sign of the immense strain on the minting machinery and personnel to keep up with production demands. That speculation only heightened the mystique around Emma's coin. Was hers among the very first struck with the flawed die? Was it a unique early state, before the die cracked further? No one could say for sure, but the ambiguity only added to its appeal. Collectors love a mystery almost as much as they love a rarity. Today, the 2005 1-cent retained cut errors are considered one of the more elusive modern Lincoln cent varieties. High-grade examples with full mint luster, like the one Emma discovered, command impressive prices at auction. What began as a humble penny destined for a cash drawer somewhere in the Midwest instead became a prized collectible, its story cherished by numismatists around the country. In the end, when Emma finally decided to consign her coin to auction, she sat quietly in the room as the bidding began. The auctioneer's voice rose and fell as paddles lifted, numbers climbing higher and higher, her hands resting calmly in her lap despite the fluttering in her chest. When the final hammer fell, she couldn't help but smile as the figure was announced. That simple cent she'd found on a rainy evening had sold for a sum she never could have imagined back then, between $35,000 and nearly $90,000, depending on condition. A reminder that even the smallest mistakes can carry the greatest value. In 2014, the United States Mint produced billions of 1-cent coins, continuing the long and steady tradition of the Lincoln Cent series that had begun in 1909. By then, the reverse design had already transitioned to the Shield cent in 2010, replacing the familiar Lincoln Memorial. The new design, crisp and modern, symbolized Lincoln's preservation of the Union, while the obverse still bore the iconic profile of Lincoln himself. The coins were struck in copper-plated zinc as they had been since 1982, and the Philadelphia and Denver mints churned out countless pieces that year, each seemingly identical to the next, destined for circulation, vending machines, and the bottoms of pockets and purses. And yet, amid this ocean of pennies, a few slipped quietly into the world carrying something quite unexpected. The error was subtle at first glance, and only the most observant eyes would catch it. A slightly shifted impression here, an odd raised area there, a distortion in the fields that made the shield appear to ripple under certain light. These errors were not immediately catalogued or noted by the mint, nor were they widely reported when they appeared in change. They went unnoticed, clinking into jars and drawers, dismissed as just another cent. Until, of course, a collector with patience and a keen sense for the unusual happened to notice one. David Mercer was that collector, a hobbyist who had begun collecting with his grandfather decades earlier. Now retired, he passed his afternoons with rolls of coins from the bank, searching for wheat pennies and double dies, small treasures in ordinary wrappers. The night he first saw the 2014 cent, it was late and quiet in his study, and the hum of a desk lamp filled the silence. He was almost ready to pack it in when his magnifier caught something strange in the copper glow of 1 penny. The coin looked crisp and bright, its surfaces gleaming as though it had just left the press. But the shield on the reverse seemed wrong. At first he thought it was his eyes, but closer inspection revealed a strange distortion at the top of the shield and along the horizontal bar. There appeared to be a faint raised area where the metal had flowed incorrectly, creating a kind of retained cut effect, a flap of die break that remained attached during striking. The effect was subtle but undeniable. David's heart began to race. He checked the obverse and noted faint rippling near Lincoln's bow tie, evidence of pressure problems during striking. He checked again, holding it up to light, comparing it to dozens of other 2014 cents from his pile. This was different, unmistakably different. He placed the coin carefully in a flip and stared at it for a long time before finally closing his eyes and leaning back in his chair, a smile of disbelief spreading across his face. The days that followed were a flurry of research. He scoured online forums, emailed a few trusted experts, and sent high-resolution photos to a grading service for preliminary evaluation. At first, there was skepticism. Modern errors are often written off as machine doubling or minor anomalies, but the photos spoke for themselves. The coin showed characteristics of a retained cut error combined with misalignment in the strike, something that suggested a serious die failure during production. When the coin came back from grading weeks later, slabbed and certified, the label read, 2014 1C retained cut obverse/reverse. The designation alone was enough to raise eyebrows in the error collecting community. David felt a rush of pride as he turned the encapsulated coin over in his hands, the light catching the shimmering copper and the faint but fascinating mistake. For a while, he kept the coin quiet, content to have it in his collection and occasionally showing it to close friends. But word spread, as it always does in numismatic circles, and soon collectors were asking questions. Were there more examples? How rare was it? What would it bring if sold? The value at first was hard to gauge. Modern errors don't always command the same respect as classic double dies or off-center strikes. But this was something different, a modern mint error of genuine significance, a perfect storm of rarity and condition. Early estimates were modest, a few $100s, maybe $1,000 at auction. But demand grew. As more collectors became aware of the 2014 retained cut variety, prices climbed. Auction houses began to list similar examples, and each sale seemed to push the ceiling a little higher. Over the next few years, the story of the 2014 cents error became something of a legend in modern era collecting. Collectors started searching rolls for similar pieces, and while a few more surfaced, they were exceedingly scarce, and none quite matched the quality of David's coin. Prices continued to climb. What had begun as a casual find in a bank roll became a hot topic among specialists, debated in forums, featured in articles, and chased at shows. The error itself fascinated everyone who examined it. The retained cut created a raised, lumpy area at the edge of the shield's top, slightly distorting the lines and making the flat bar appear thicker in one spot. On the obverse, faint rippling around Lincoln's bow tie and collar hinted at the pressure imbalance during striking. Collectors marveled at how such a significant die failure had escaped detection in the mint's rigorous quality control process. Then came the twist no one expected. Further examination by another expert revealed that the die crack responsible for the retained cut likely extended much further into the die face than originally thought, suggesting the potential for even more dramatic errors that might still be waiting to be discovered. That revelation reignited the hunt, and collectors scrambled to comb through rolls and change jars, hoping to find one of the elusive siblings of David's coin. David was approached by auction houses more than once, each time offering increasingly higher estimates of what his coin might fetch. He resisted at first, enjoying the quiet thrill of owning something so rare, but finally decided to consign it to a major sale. When the auction night arrived, he sat in the back of the room, watching as the bidding began. The auctioneer's voice called out the opening bid, and hands went up immediately. The price rose quickly, climbing past the initial estimate, then beyond the next. A wave of murmurs passed through the room as the numbers grew. At last, the hammer fell, and the final price was announced. That small copper coin, worth just a penny when struck, had sold for between $30,000 and $88,000, a testament to how even the smallest imperfection can transform the ordinary into the extraordinary.